before I share screen, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm Yancey Fouché. As Madison said, I'm the Director of Sustainability at Davidson College. I assume some of you at least are from the Charlotte region. I know we maybe have folks from around the state. Davidson is a pretty small, about 1,900 student liberal arts residential institution just north of Charlotte, North Carolina. And so as part of my role, I primarily focus on sort of the balance of campus operations and trying to measure and improve sustainability in how we run our campus, as well as co-curricular education and programming for our student body. And you'll hear a little bit about both of those, but mainly the operational side around climate action planning today. So with that, wanted to talk about sustainable living. So if you were coming hoping to be scared silly about the grave danger that our planet is in, you've come to the wrong place. I think my working assumption is that if you've taken time out of your day to be here, then you are committed to leveraging your own life for improving some of the areas in our world that need improvement. And so I want to help you think about how to most strategically do that in a way that makes the biggest difference, because you likely feel like I do that we do have some pretty urgent challenges before us. But I also hope you take away that this work can, and I think should, be joyful and fun. So, you know, we don't have to be sort of martyrs in this work. We can try to engage others and enjoy it ourselves. And so I commonly find that when people talk about, you know, incorporating or work really hard to incorporate more sustainable practices in their day-to-day life, they work very hard at that. And sometimes, not always, but sometimes, working really hard is not the same thing as working smart. And so I hope that you'll begin to reflect on choosing which actions you pursue and even how you pursue those actions and how you engage others around that in a way that uses your valuable time and energy in a way that makes the greatest impact possible. So I'll be drawing on this year, as I mentioned, we have been doing a 10-year climate action plan update at Davidson College for kind of looking at our campus operations. So I will be referring back to that process as we've run it over the past year because it's fresh on my mind, and I thought a lot and talked to others and brainstormed with others too about how to be most strategic in that process and in the recommendations that we're bringing to our senior leadership team at Davidson. So I want to share some of those lessons that I've been thinking about there with you, and then I'll also throw in some personal anecdotes. But again, I encourage you to even now begin to reflect on some stories or some examples of how these ideas might apply to your own life. So choosing a lens. So last week, I had the experience of helping a student, long story, but I was helping a student. They graduated on Tuesday last week. And then so late in the week, I was helping a student to pack some belongings and move out of her student residence hall on campus, okay? This student I admire very much and for different reasons, but one of them is her personal lifestyle is, I mean, she walks the talk around sustainability. And I know that when we talk about a zero waste lifestyle, that may seem ambitious, but she lives as close to zero waste lifestyle as anybody I've ever known. To the point that, you know, as we were going through things, she doesn't have a car, so she has limited opportunity to actually transport things and whatever. And, you know, she's picking up every little item that may seem like trash to others, you know, and saying, oh, but these rusty baking pans, we could drill holes in them and make them planters, you know, or I don't think this backpack is suited to donating, but if it's mended in this way, it could be donated. So that's the kind of person I'm talking about. Well, I had an interesting kind of moment with her where she had a big bag of recycling that she was, you know, about to take out. And one of the items was a peanut butter jar. And she actually, though, she had that in the trash bag. And so I was kind of surprised. I was like, oh, Olivia, you didn't want to recycle this jar. Well, she had thought about it, of course, and she thought that the water she would use in cleaning the jar would not be worth sort of the impact of the reclamation of the plastic through the recycling process. So as we know, as you learn about these topics, we always find that there are overlapping areas of impact that people have. Sometimes, a certain behavior or action can be a win-win across multiple areas, but sometimes you're going to have to make choices where you pit one value or one priority over another. So, of course, in the story I just shared, Olivia was thinking a little bit more about water conservation as opposed to, maximizing plastic diversion. But I just encourage you to choose a lens. So for the purpose of thinking about Davidson and our experience as an institution, this past year, we've been thinking about climate change as the lens. And you will see as I give some further examples that we stuck hard to that climate as the lens. There are lots of important topics out there, but we can't do everything. And so we're going to continue to be sure that we're emphasizing and communicating around that lens. So for you, social justice, that's important to a lot of people right now. Animal welfare, supporting a thriving local community, so is buying local foods and locally manufactured goods important. So there are lots of different lenses, and then your challenge becomes finding credible information and really thinking through how to measure and how to make your choices based on the lens that you choose. So on that note, you will manage what you measure. For Davidson, we were very lucky in that the framework, higher education has a framework for greenhouse gas emissions and for climate change. And that's existed for over a decade now. And so just over 10 years ago, Davidson signed on to a climate commitment through that network. It's called Second Nature. And one of our requirements with that was annually reporting our greenhouse gas emissions from campus operations. So I've been doing that work for the past 5 years. Other folks have been doing it before me. And we're lucky in that we have that ongoing annual data set to be able to see trends and see, when we implemented certain changes or campus projects, how that may have affected our greenhouse gas emissions or our contributions to global climate change. For you, measuring may look really different, right, as an individual. So, and don't feel that you have to get too wonky about it. I'm not a Fitbit person, so a lot of times for me, it's not about, really sitting with the numbers, and certainly not sitting with them that constantly, but going back periodically. So one idea might be if you're trying to reduce your personal waste. This is a fun one that I've heard some professors have assigned to students in the past. Carry around a big trash bag for a week, and everything that you're going to be sending to landfill, all the trash that you generate for 1 week, put it in that trash bag. And I think for people, the lived experience of having to feel it get heavier and bulkier or whatever is a really impactful way to see how much landfill trash you're generating. Again, I think, especially for personal actions, it's overkill to obsess over it and say, I'm going to waste audit my personal trash every week and all these things. Certainly, if that's your style, go for it. But for me, it would be like, okay, so maybe as I try to incorporate more and more low waste behaviors into my lifestyle, once a quarter or once every 3 months or something, I'm going to try the trash bag thing again and see if I've gotten better, see if there's still room to improve. All right, guard against out of sight, out of mind. So my husband, picking on my husband, even though he's not here to defend himself right now. We all have, I'm sure, with our family or friends, these sort of squabbles, right, over kind of behaviors and where to put our impact and our energy. My husband flips out over food waste. So I'm somebody who likes local food. So if we have our CSA or we have something where, whatever, we've shopped and we have a little bit of a food that's past its prime or something like that, it's really important to him not to see that thrown away. Yet, he also is somebody who is happy to, shop in mainstream stores, eat out at restaurants, et cetera, et cetera. And I really try to encourage him to step back and think about the whole life cycle cost. That's a phrase that's a little technical, but it just simply means, a certain product. Don't just think about what you see, but think about all of the resources. It could be water, it could be carbon emissions or whatever that's associated with, growing that product, if that's relevant, manufacturing that product, transporting it from site to site to site to where you are. So for me, if I have, we have a very busy household, busy life, and if I can't cook every bit of our CSA in a given 2-week cycle, I'm not going to sweat that so much when I know that a restaurant where we may have chosen to eat or a mainstream grocery store where we may have chosen to shop has their own food waste issues that they're hopefully, trying to think about and work through, but not always. And just because we don't see those and we don't know about like large factory farming and we don't see, you may watch documentaries and you may learn about this stuff, but there's a lot of food waste at different parts in the production cycle that for me, if I'm buying from a local farmer who I know is really responsible for their resources, I can feel a little bit better about kind of overall impact there. So this happens all the time, right? That we focus on what is in our immediate day-to-day existence rather than the big picture. Great example, plastics recycling. If you followed over the past year, 2 years, really, when China stopped taking a lot of the materials that the US was had collected and was sending there for reclamation for recycling, that caused a drop in the market of recycled materials in the US. So that's just one example where, try as hard as you might to rinse out that peanut butter jar and recycle it in your home. Let's step back and think about the big picture of, is that item really going to be recycled? How do we shift products altogether? How do we at scale, as individuals, what scope do we have to build the market for recycled materials in the U.S., right? So that there is actually a market for those end-of-life products when we finish with them. And then I would just encourage you, once you've chosen your lens with the area that's or the value that is going to drive like a change that you want to make in your life, you need to really think about what are credible sources of information to do research. We know that the world and social media are replete right now with, call it fake news, call it what you want, with people who just have opinions and you're going to find those online. But, extension universities that have extension agencies, certainly, if government research entities, there are lots of credible sources out there. So try to find real facts on what you prioritize so that you can make the most informed decisions about where you can make the most impact. All right. So for Davidson College, I mentioned that we have greenhouse gas data for our campus. So we chose a representative year that seemed pretty, to be a good fit for really showing what our typical climate impact is across different areas of the campus. And you can see that purchased electricity, notice the scale here is % of our total impact, not metric tons of carbon equivalent, which is what we would use as the raw number there. But as a % of our total impact, purchased electricity is about 53%. In an average year. So that should clearly, in my mind, if we're worried about climate impact, we know that one activity represents over half of our impact, then that's something we should really be focused on. Next up, other on-campus stationary, that's a technical way of saying other fuels that we use on campus. For our case, we have a big boiler plant that helps to heat and work with the HVAC systems in our buildings around campus. Burns natural gas. So that's something we needed to be thinking about. How do we function? How do we work with those needs for heating and HVAC around campus, right? We also are choosing to look at air travel because that's a little bit lower, but that's a different story for another day. What I want you to notice, though, is this paper purchasing is this tiny sliver down here. Solid waste, not much larger, about, I think it's 1.5% of our total footprint. It can be tied back to our landfill waste from campus because we do compost and we have obviously, recycling programs and stuff like that. So I get a lot of energy and communication from students and employees who, we've got to reduce printing on campus. We've got to go zero waste. Those are really important tools. They clearly have an impact on climate. They have an impact, we know, on other things, right? Water and land use for the example of waste, et cetera. So sure, we should be working on them. But if my task at the moment is thinking about climate action and I want to make the most impact, I've got to stay super focused and disciplined on these two red areas right here. Okay, so people encounter, they throw things in a landfill bin or a recycling bin. They sometimes get things off the printer if they're reading assigned a text for class, or they choose to read it on a device or whatever. So that impacts a lot of people, and for that reason, it is really important for the outreach and engagement. But for me, the lens right now is quantitative impact, not how many people are reached through this initiative. And so you got to say no to some stuff, right? I wanted to include this graphic, which is a few years old at this point, but I just love it. It's very important, I think, from a literature review. So these authors, Wines and Nicholas, reviewed at that time all of the literature across the world that had measured the carbon impact or the emission savings, they're calling it, from certain personal lifestyle decisions or choices that people might make. And the impact varies because in certain countries we have different systems, and that contributes to how much carbon is associated with a certain activity. But they found these averages. And their other really important point in this paper was that most of the messaging that governments across the world are pushing out to individuals to try to get them to become more sustainable or to reduce their carbon footprint focuses on the low impact activities, right? So I'm sure we've all heard it. Look at this, upgrade your light bulbs. Yes, great. Let's do it. It's an easy change. Upgrade those light bulbs. You'll get the, if you're a Duke customer, you'll get the free ones in the mail. That's awesome. But have you thought about, do you really step back and think about how you move around, day to day in your car? Probably a car. I'm guessing most people on this call own a car and use it. Have we had the really hard conversation around, rates of childbirth, right? And what it means that through over time, the number of children we have and that decision does impact the amount of resources that humans are consuming on this planet. I know it's highly controversial, but by the numbers, I mean, it's true. Avoid one transatlantic flight. So this one made a huge impact on me personally and how I think about my work at the college. To think that one flight, and I was sharing earlier, I started my career in study abroad and see so much value in the cultural learning and the growth and the important value of exposure to other people and other places. But there is no getting around the fact that each of those transatlantic flights has a very significant impact in every flight, but especially those long haul ones, on greenhouse gas emissions and climate change. So something to really think about as you plan your personal travel. So I know everybody's going to have their own lens. Climate change may not be the most important thing to you, but I know for many it is. So I wanted to share this as a really credible and, for me, valuable source in thinking about that. All right, incrementalism is okay. So I thought, as I was prepping this slide, I thought there's lots of sort of idioms I could throw out here, right? Perfect is the enemy of good. Give yourself some grace. But we had a great speaker on campus just before COVID broke, when we could have in-person speakers on campus. And he was actually a philosopher and a religious philosopher who came at vegetarianism from the perspective of faith and of humane treatment of animals. And I loved his message, which was, we often tend to represent issues as black or white, as one or the other. You do this or you don't. And even around the identity, we ask people, are you vegan? Are you vegetarian, et cetera, et cetera. If reducing meat in your diet, which we know has positive impacts for water use and greenhouse gas emissions and other things, if that's something that's important to you, we historically in the U.S. come from a very meat-heavy kind of culture in terms of our diet, and so don't feel like you've got to go whole hog, to use a food metaphor. You can ease into it. Meatless Mondays are a popular trend. Maybe you want to do more than that. Maybe you want to start cutting out all meat at lunch, right? And that's an area for you to start. So start somewhere. If I think about like dieting, right? We often see that people go too far in a diet and they are so strict about it for a while, and then they that deprivation drives a sense of like, I need this thing because I don't have it at all. And then they go back. So whatever it is that you choose to focus on, I would encourage you to, again, just go easy on yourself and move into it, and you'll develop a habit that you can build on over time. An example from the Davidson experience of climate action planning, to address that high impact of our electricity purchase on campus, we're very seriously studying options for large renewable power purchase agreements. We could cover 100% of the electricity that we consume on campus, and that would be amazing. That would be my ideal. But we also have an opportunity on the table that would cover 75% of the electricity that we use on campus in terms of its carbon impact, and replacing that with renewable energy. And the deal has a lot of benefits in that we could achieve it more quickly. And so for me, I've got to weigh like, all right, time scale versus total amount of impact, which is more important. So again, these are great issues, and don't sweat them too much. Make a decision and then move on. All right. If back to sort of personal experience and incrementalism, if you want to start trying to play with, when we go back from COVID, if you start going back into an office or going other places, more often than you have been, try making one of those trips a week, not using your car, by bike or foot or public transportation, and then see if you can grow that from there. And then finally, on this point, I want to acknowledge that as humans, we have different seasons of our lives. And I certainly feel this a lot. I was telling Madison about my experience over the past year, as a working parent, mothering a third grader and a kindergartner who were doing virtual schooling all year and trying to hold down a full-time job at the same time. It was chaos. And if some of the sustainable behaviors that depend on functioning systems around us and societal support for things like childcare and the list goes on, as an individual, it's unrealistic for us to bear the burden of societal kind of structures that don't work. So give yourself some grace again, and just keep going back to that. And I have to understand, before I had kids, every time I did the laundry, I was out there, hanging it on the line to dry, so I didn't have to use the electricity from my dryer. I'll be honest, with kids who have extracurricular activities and dinner needs to be made and all the things have to happen, that's not on my, we have a dryer now and we use it. But that doesn't mean that, you know, when my life becomes more manageable and I have more flexibility in schedule, I can go back to that. So also through your life, assess like what you really have capacity for right now, and then how you need to adjust as you go. All right, systems change. So again, talking about like the individual burden, you know, again, super well-intentioned that we all sort our recycling in our homes and take it to the bin. But to go back to that example, the most effective thing I think anybody can do is read the news and follow local issues and engage in them. So go to your town meeting, help research what are, if recycling is the thing you care about, what are some policies and some actions that have been effective in other municipalities or maybe even other states that we could consider here in North Carolina or in your local town or city. And, you know, consider meeting with your elected officials, consider going to these meetings and using your public comment period. Consider sitting on the board of a local nonprofit organization that's doing good work on something you care about. Consider running for office yourself if that's something that you would be interested in. Another great opportunity is that most municipalities have citizen engagement committees around sustainability topics, be it transportation or climate change or land use planning. You can have a really big impact as a citizen volunteering your time to give input to staff and to elected officials on the topics that you care about. And so I know we're talking more about lifestyle stuff today, but I want to always be sure, and I always do with students too, to remind them that engaging in the community is the way you're gonna be able to really find leverage points to larger scale change. Just a fun photo and example. These are my two boys I mentioned, I guess 2 years ago or something, pre-COVID. Some of you may have followed, there was a really important case at the Marshall Steam Station near where I live around a nuclear facility that Duke Energy owns there, and they were storing their coal ash along Lake Norman, which is the drinking water source for all of Charlotte. And so there was a huge, I think they expected about, 20 people to show up at this public meeting on that topic. Hundreds, if not thousands of people showed up and were overflowing the doors. It was a great turnout. My boys, I was able to bring them with me, and it's an experience they still think about and talk about. And when the ruling finally came out that Duke was going to have to move their coal ash away from the water where it was shown to have been leaching into the groundwater there, my oldest son, who you see in the picture, remembered the meeting and remembered actually the policy options that had been on the table, and that his participation with many other people in an advocacy effort had paid off. And so, again, that's the kind of stuff that I just really encourage you to seek out as well. And again, back to kind of the big picture and the joy piece. So even at Davidson, even as I've been doing climate action planning work, which focuses on very technical projects, right? How we run our buildings and almost have to become a facilities expert to understand some of the stuff. It's important to know that that is an area, of course, that I feel is important and that we need to make progress on as an institution. However, we are, at the end of the day, an educational institution. And so meanwhile, we have amazing graduates who are walking across the stage. They've spent 4 years with us at our institution, and they are going on to become difference makers in the world in many cases, very influential positions across sectors and across industries. So, if they leave with more knowledge on these topics, more of the skills they need to advocate and act and incorporate, think about systems thinking and sustainability in the roles that they have in their lives, then that's the biggest long-term impact we can make, more so than, an installation of solar panels that we might have on campus or something. So in your work too, I would encourage you, what brings you joy? Like, what do you want to spend your time doing? And that's where you can make your impact. What are the skills that are unique to you that you can leverage to contribute to system solutions. For me, I'll share that I had the opportunity a number of years ago to teach a course on the slow food movement, if anyone's familiar with that. And again, back to the study abroad days, had the chance to travel with students to Italy, to a working farm, and eat in Rome and learn about a different cuisine and talk about how the cuisine and the culture of Italy really values, locally grown heritage varieties of food, that sort of thing. As part of that course, we read Michael Pollan's, one of his books. He's a great kind of writer on food. And his mantra was eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So eat food, he means if it's got a ton of additives and weird ingredients that you've never heard of, probably not the right thing to be eating. Not too much, that, both for our bodies and for the health of the planet. Obviously, the less we eat, kind of the better. We don't need to overindulge. And then mostly plants. Again, it's not to say that, his idea at least is that never ever should an ounce of meat touch your plate, but that you should really focus on a plant-forward diet, and maybe you have small amounts that get incorporated of meat that get incorporated into your menu. So for me, that's become a really important part of my philosophy around food, instead of again, just going back to the data and just focusing on let's measure what is the carbon impact of this thing. But, think big picture. You're living your life on this planet. You want to make a difference, but you also want to enjoy the beauty of the natural world that is around us, and be grateful for that. And remember that, our lives are rooted in sort of the world all around us. So with that, definitely went over time, of course. But let's take about 10 minutes for conversation, Q&A, and I think Madison's going to help me moderate that.
Absolutely. There's a little bit of an echo. Okay. There's one question. Are sustainable concepts and requirements written into private source contracts and awards?
Okay, can you read it one more time to me?
Are sustainable concepts and requirements written into private source contracts and awards?
Oh, the question maybe is for Davidson College? Like for our,
Bill, if you would like to unmute yourself and ask your question or clarify more, that would be great.
Madison, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oftentimes when you request items from outside, we have to bid on them. Sometimes the source would like to have sustainability qualities. And as far as Davidson, it's probably going to be better for Davidson as an institute to source companies that are sustainable, or at least try to be sustainable. Does that help? Confused?
Yeah, it does. Thank you for that question. I wasn't sure if it was specific to the institution or a more general thing. Yes, agreed. That can be a very powerful tool, and we've begun to do that a little bit. Anyway, it's sort of nuanced about Davidson College and how we operate and stuff, but we don't have any kind of centralized purchasing or office around even contracts and grants and bids and how that stuff happens. And so area by area, there are a few larger contracts where we've been able to discuss putting general language in that we value sustainability, because it can look different for different people, and then being sure that they highlight what their firm or their company uniquely can offer in that area or how they think about it. Similarly, just incidentally, we've begun to do similar stuff on certain projects around diversity and inclusion as well. So we find that to be a useful tool rather than prescribing, but certainly for key building projects, I mean, we remain committed to a LEED, standard in all new building and major renovation and stuff. So we've done a pretty good job on some of the key areas of impact with that. But agreed it can be a great tool.
Thank you.
Awesome, great question. Again, if you have any questions, you can type them in the chat box, or you can raise your hand and we'll call on you to ask your question.
And please don't limit it to questions. I'd love to hear, feedback. If you totally disagree with something I said and think, it would challenge me to think about it differently, or our group to think about it differently. I am no expert on day-to-day sustainable lifestyle. I do my best, but certainly not the Dalai Lama in that regard.
I was curious if you could share a little bit more about the recycling. You had mentioned at one point a lot of our recycling is shipped to China. Could you elaborate a little bit more on that for folks who maybe are hearing that for the first time?
Sure. Yeah. Again, I'm not totally remembering the year properly, but my guess would be it was in 2019, maybe 2020. Of course, the pandemic, I'm sure, would have disrupted this area of trade anyway. But there was a major, diplomatic change in the agreement, and part of sort of the trade relations between China and the U.S. specifically. I don't know that it affected other parts of the world, and that historically, much of what so we call it a MRF, when you send your recycling away from your home or your institution, the hauler, the company whose truck picks that up, often takes it. They could own it, or they could take it to a third-party facility, which is I'm forgetting what MRF stands for, but MI something recycling facility, right? And so each MRF has its own process by which it sorts the materials that are in, most of us now have those commingled bins, right? And so that's why you see some variation in what you can or can't recycle at different municipalities and stuff, because MRFs operate slightly differently in their technology. Well, then they take, if it's like cardboard or if it's plastic or glass or whatever, in the case of, plastics, they would bale it and shred it usually, and then bale it, and then typically they would send that product over to China, and there were a lot of facilities there that would, incorporate that or not, let's be honest. So a lot of it maybe was not actually, it was being landfilled in China. I think they were feeling, part of the rationale for their decision is they were being overwhelmed by the amount of stuff that we were sending over there. And so I always tell people, clearly, when I think about it, if you're thinking about plastics waste, reduce. If you can, it's super hard though. I know now, if you're just an individual, you walk into a grocery store, half the produce is already in plastic when you get it. And so again, that's an advocacy opportunity, I think, right there, to, either at the corporate level or at state or city levels, the city of Charleston, I know I happen to have family there, so I visit sometimes, they ban plastic bags, and you walk into a CVS, you're only going to get a paper bag when you walk out. So you can regulate it at that level. But another key thing is, there's some innovation happening around the US and even in the Southeast, the market for recycled materials. So for myself, I did a lot of research and thinking before I did it, but we needed a new couch. And with kids, I was kind of worried about the health impacts of this, but I felt okay once I did some research. And we bought a couch that was covered in a fabric that had been created from recycled plastics, right? And so the more I think we drive the product chain for recycled materials, the more there will actually be a market where you can feel confident that your plastic is being recycled when you do have to use it and send it away.
That's awesome. Thanks for elaborating on that. I think, Bob Brown, you have your hand up. If you'd like to unmute yourself and ask your question, that'd be great.
Yeah, you mentioned trying to meet LEED standards for new buildings and so forth. Have you had any impact or interact concerning planting trees on campus, maybe developing green roofs, having a university vegetable garden, anything like that, or when you do build new buildings, obtaining new land to plant trees on as an offset for those that had to be taken out to put in a new building, things like that?
Sure. Yeah, so we've done a lot, and the task here was not so much to cover sustainability at Davidson today, so I certainly haven't been comprehensive in how I've talked about it, but yes, we have a campus farm that I'm proud to say, supplies quite a bit of produce to our campus dining facility. Commons is our main, the name of our main cafeteria there on campus. That's been running for 8-ish years now. We have a really robust composting initiative that we just transitioned actually this year, though. We had been composting entirely on campus, and students had been part of that work. But they, Madison, am I still here?
Yes, you are.
You still hear me? Okay. I just clicked on a different screen. You know me and Microsoft Teams here. So wanted to be sure you can still hear me. So the compost, so we reclaim from Commons, I mentioned 100% of our pre and post-consumer food waste. So things that are scraped off people's plates when they finish, plus like the top of a watermelon or whatever may be cut off back in the kitchen by our dining staff. And then this year, though, we ran into a problem, long story, but a lack of cooler space, and per our state permit, the food waste had to be chilled until we could, compost it daily. And so with that kink in the system, we decided to outsource. So we're working with a Charlotte-based company that also serves some other Davidson businesses to send them our food waste for compost. And we also compost all of our grounds waste on campus. Move out programs for students have been big. Green roofs is not something we've tackled. It's always sort of those sorts of decisions are building by building. We haven't, well, I take that back. We've had a couple of major, buildings over the past 5-7 years, but there are a couple more on the horizon where there's always an opportunity for something sort of innovative like that. I think that would be fun. Trees, we are a certified arboretum. There's some ongoing work to sort of revive that program. We've had a transition in personnel that affected that, but I think we're in pretty good shape. I think, just having at a small institution, being sure that you have the expertise in-house. So I know that the head of grounds right now has a lot of experience in sort of native plants and, pollinator supporting plants and things like that. So he does a pretty good job when he has the chance to kind of do new areas to think about that. But we don't yet, one thing I'd love to work towards, we don't yet have anything like a 1-for-1 policy. He plants trees when he gets the chance, but there's nothing to really measure that, if we have to cut, which happens, a tree down because it's near end of life or it's lost a limb or there's the threat that it'll lose a limb for someone that that we would be sure to replace that with 1 or even more trees, that sort of thing. So, and we have dabbled in carbon offsets, which is what you mentioned, I think, around land, supporting land with replanting. That's a longer term strategy as part of our climate action plan, but not something. First, we want to sort of do what we can to reduce on campus impact and be as responsible, as we can with our own operations. And then I think we'll begin to think about offsets where we can't fully, get 100% there. Let's do maybe one more question, Madison, 1 or 2.
Yeah, so we just have a question here from Sarah. Any thoughts on upcycling as an art form and the impact that it has had on waste stream reduction, if any?
Yeah, I think it's a really fun topic. It gets back to that sort of joy piece we were talking about and engagement. Incidentally, I run a program, a summer internship program for students to work with organizations across Charlotte on sustainability, efforts they have underway. And there was one student who did a really neat thing. I think it was with, I'm trying to remember the organization, was that Sustain Charlotte or with the city maybe? And they, it was Livable Mech, I think. And they were working on something just like that in the center of a community that had low recycling rates, and to try to use the community art installation that was, made from, I think, use plastic bottles and that sort of thing as a way to engage and then bring people in and teach them, what could be recycled and how. So yeah, I think anything creative to engage people is great, especially in schools, with kids.
Oh yeah, that's great. Bill Wills, we just have one more comment here really quick. Please comment on the increased amount of nanoparticles in the environment, specifically for the degradation and its effects on healthy way of life, either plant or animal. And then just he commented he agrees with less use as well.
Yeah, nanoparticles. Harkening back a little bit to my my grad school days. So as you can probably tell from what I've been talking about, my role is very much of a generalist role now. I need to know a little bit about a lot of things and then have to turn to the experts, be they on campus or off campus, to really dive into those topics. But and we have actually had some faculty and students doing interesting research on that topic in waterways and the persistence and presence of different types of plastics, and then they're able to source them back to what kind of product might they have originally come from in the oceans. But yes, it's a scary time to be living in a world, myself with kids, and as you say, also just plants and animals, having, I shouldn't say just, also the damage that we are doing to plants and animals in terms of the manufactured materials of all types that are in our water and our soils and our air. So in so many ways, I just think back to the basics is best. There's one example I think I didn't include, which is at one point somebody asked me, and so I did a little digging into this whole, as you know, it's a huge phenomenon, and COVID has accelerated that around direct, I forget what they call it, but direct to door deliveries. So I certainly experience a lot of friends and colleagues and neighbors and stuff who have a mentality of being green is like buying the next best product and often getting that shipped right to your door. And, so often the simplest old-fashioned solutions where you use what we have, you don't use too much, you use things that are more natural and less manufactured, lower engineered, whatever, those are going to be the best choices. The carbon footprint of delivering, I forget what it was I was looking at, but it was something where you can buy a traditional product, or you can buy the greener alternative to that product. And the carbon footprint from getting the lower carbon or the greener product delivered straight to your door was still far higher than buying the cheaper traditional product and driving yourself to a brick and mortar store to get it. So this whole logistics supply chain economy that we're creating around, I want something now and I want it delivered straight to where I live or straight to my business, and I'm not willing to wait or go somewhere where it's being aggregated, through a distributor at a store or whatever, is pretty problematic. And that's just something that I learned that I would encourage y'all to think about too.
Awesome, that's great. I don't think I see any more questions.
Okay, great. So what I would love to do is go back through, Madison, do you have any tips on how I could just find where I see my general, where I can share screen and all that kind of stuff?
The little box with an up arrow, that's how you share your content. Is that what you mean?
Well, right now it's showing me the meeting chat and I can't seem to close it.
Oh, you can try clicking, there should be an X on the meeting chat. You should be able to close that out. But the little share content, are you not able to see that one still with that open? No, okay. Well, let's see here. If you're unable to close out of the chat box, then I'm not sure what to recommend. You could try clicking on one of the other sections, like the participants or another icon.
Yeah, that's okay. I'm having a hard time with it. I don't want folks to have to sit here while I belabor that. So I will go back through. I will read them, our slides, and I'm going to give you just we're close on time. I'm going to give you maybe a minute with each one, and I just want you to take your pencil and paper or your keyboard or whatever works for you, and kind of think through one. Again, you can't change everything about your life. You can't change everything about the world all at once, but you can make progress, right? So pick something, choose a lens right now. What is the lens that you want to think about making an adjustment around? Okay. How might you measure your impact on that topic? What are some hidden impacts or some sort of distractions, I guess, that could lead you astray from making direct impact in the area you want to make it? Some false assumptions you may need to explore, or you may need to learn more about to figure out whether they're the right assumptions or they're false assumptions. Okay, what's a way you can phase in your impact or your behavior change on this topic over time? All right, and is there a way that you could think about changing the whole sort of context or the whole system within which this behavior exists to create a sort of change at scale that would help not only you but others make the kind of impact you want to make at a larger scale? If you don't know, what's a way you could start to explore and learn about opportunities in that space? And then finally, what's a way you're going to hold yourself accountable for keeping the big picture in mind? As an example, maybe it's a, periodic conversation with a trusted, friend or support network or somebody who's interested in these topics as well. But there might be other ways that work for you. All right, so that was super quick. but hopefully was helpful and maybe gives you some thoughts to begin to sort of go back and spend a little more time like fleshing out and learning about the topic that you're most interested in. But I'd love to hear from one or two people real quick about, you know, what's your area of impact you seek, and where there's some key thoughts that came out in that exercise for you about how you might move forward.
And you can feel free to just unmute yourself, or you can type it in the chat.
Hello? Yeah, I'm making a butterfly highway. So getting the plants and things organized and getting information from organizations, North Carolina organizations, and trying to get more native plants into our yard and such.
I love it. Good luck with that, Linda. Can we all come see, or will you share photos?
I'd love to. Yeah, it's fun, and I think it'll make a big difference.
Yeah, that's great. I love that. Thank you for doing that work.
Feel free to send me those photos, Linda. I'd love to see them.
Oh, okay.
I will put my email in the chat box.
Who else? Anybody else want to share before we break for the day?
Hi, this is Sarah.
Hey, Sarah.
I would like to compost more. You know, I think that I can totally relate. You know, kids change your time dynamic, and so one of the pitfalls that I see is actually going out, you know, to the compost bin. And so I was thinking about maybe trying vermicomposting or something that's right in the kitchen, that is it's more accessible. So that's kind of an inspiration that I had just in thinking about the pitfalls. Thank you so much for this fantastic presentation.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Well, listen, I found that composting is a great chore. So if you're going to build that personal responsibility, you send them out there. Rain, we haven't had much snow lately, but whatever the weather, send them out to the bin with the bucket.
Duly noted.
Looks like Bob would like to share. Bob?
Well, just the one last thing you mentioned right at the first. My wife and I are sitting here comparing, well, what can we do? Recycling, not going to Europe to see our grandkids, or what kind of car we drive, all those things. But you said at the first, and I think it's critically important, that going to your town meetings, getting elected to office, writing letters to the governor, your representatives, these things are going to have to change by policy. All 20 of us or so could change something minor that we've talked about in our lives, and it would really be nearly negligible on the world carbon balance. But your community and your state and nationally, policy changes is what we really need.
Yeah, it's true. Thanks for that observation. And I know it's so hard with your grandkids, right? This is, I mean, and we talk about all kinds of equity, and yeah, it's really tough when sometimes, you know, people might just be jet setting around the world for fun, and then somebody else really, that's such a key moment for their family life and their personal life to get to connect with other people. So, you know, again, just do it thoughtfully, and then think about your impact. You can buy, you know, the one nice thing is now it's very easy to buy carbon offsets if you do feel like, you know, the trip is really important that you need to take. So that's an option. And then the other thing I would say is I've always been one who's very much like systems change, you know, yeah, we can do all this stuff on our own. But my mind's been changed a little bit by that, looking at the experience over COVID. I mean, early on, especially, very little of the reduction in flying and driving was regulated. I mean, if ever, I don't know that it was very often mandated by countries or governments that people couldn't fly. They just stopped flying. I mean, for obvious reasons. So, you know, yes, we're only individuals, but if society starts changing in a certain direction, even short of government intervention or other systemic changes like that, that can really send signals to the market and move us all in a certain way as well. So there are all these different forces. Cool. Well, we're over time, but thank you everyone for your participation today. And Madison, if you want to, I don't know if I put my email on there, but if you want to throw my email in the chat, if you wouldn't mind as well.
I will make sure to actually put it. We're going to do a follow-up email with the recording, so I'll make sure to add your email in there. So if anybody has any other questions, feel free to reach out to her anytime. And thank you so much for doing this presentation for us. I mean, it's just been fantastic to hear all these different lifestyle changes that somebody can make. So we really appreciate you giving us some guidance on how to make those changes.
Yeah, well, keep up the good work, everybody. Thanks for being allies, and work hard, but also work smart and find joy in the work, right? All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, have a good day.
All right. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.